Nara had never been to Earth before. She'd spent most of her life studying the intricacies of Zethrian biology, and it was only when the Council realized their species' reproductive decline that they decided to send a team to Earth to understand human breeding. Nara, the alien nurse, was one of the best of her class, and this assignment was an opportunity she couldn't pass up. Of course, she'd been given little more than a vague briefing on human biology, which, in retrospect, probably wasn't enough to prepare her for what lay ahead. Upon arriving at the Earth Research Facility, Nara was led into a sterile lab room filled with strange human equipment. She looked around, adjusting the delicate sensors in her uniform, and tried to assess the situation. Her task was clear: study human reproductive processes, specifically breeding. But she had been given no further context on the emotional or cultural aspects of human biology. To her, it was a clinical, scientific task. She assumed breeding was just another medical procedure, no different from taking a blood sample or conducting a tissue scan. She couldn't have been more wrong. Eric, on the other hand, was a geneticist who specialized in human reproduction. He was selected to work with Nara due to his reputation as a skilled but socially awkward scientist. Despite his knowledge, he had no idea what to expect from his new alien colleague. At first glance, Nara was unlike anyone he'd ever met: tall, strikingly beautiful, and with a presence that immediately made him feel like an awkward teenager. He shook her hand, trying his best to seem composed, but his nervousness was palpable. He could already tell that this assignment was going to be interesting. The initial introductions were as stiff as expected. Eric tried to be as professional as possible, though there was no hiding his unease. He fumbled with his notes, adjusting his glasses, and gave Nara a brief overview of what the study would involve. But when he mentioned human reproduction, things immediately began to veer off course. Nara, staring at him intently, nodded as she listened. Yes, she said in a tone that made it clear she understood completely. Breeding. We've been briefed on your species' breeding rituals. We will proceed with the procedure, yes? Eric blinked. Well, not exactly like that, he said, his voice growing hesitant. See, human reproduction isn't just a biological process, it involves emotions, feelings, relationships. It's a bit more complex. Complex? Nara repeated, puzzled. But you have to breed, right? That's the medical procedure? How do we begin the procedure? Eric's face turned beet red. He cleared his throat and tried again, this time more cautiously. No, it's not really like that. It's about emotions and, consent. It's a process that involves two people, not just a simple medical test. He smiled awkwardly, hoping she'd understand. But judging by the blank expression on her face, she didn't. So, we need to find someone to breed with? Nara asked, her voice entirely serious. Eric's eyes widened. No! That's not okay, let's slow down. What I'm saying is that there's a lot more to it than just a medical procedure. Human breeding is a deeply personal thing. It's about connection, trust, and, love. It's not just, an experiment. But you call it breeding. The procedure is part of biology, yes? There is no need for this love talk. I've studied the biology of your species. It should be very simple. Can we not begin the breeding procedure now? Nara's tone was unwavering, and her confidence only made Eric more uncomfortable. His heart raced as he nervously adjusted his glasses. Well, Eric started. It's not really something you can just start. It's something that happens over time, usually after two people. So you don't breed immediately? Nara interrupted, confused. Why not? What is this time you speak of? Shouldn't the procedure be straightforward? Eric's stomach churned with embarrassment, but he pressed on, trying to be as delicate as possible. Look, human relationships are about much more than just biology. There's trust and feelings, and sometimes it takes time for people to develop those feelings before anything physical happens. Nara blinked. So, you're saying there's no medical procedure? This breeding requires emotional involvement? Eric nodded, nervously smiling. Yeah. That's, the general idea. Nara seemed to mull over this information for a moment. But in Zethra, we have no time for emotions. Breeding is biological, immediate. We do not waste time with feelings. Eric felt his face flush deeper. Well, you're on Earth now. We do things a bit differently here, he said with an uncomfortable laugh. You see, humans, well, we need to build a connection first. Nara seemed intrigued. A connection? She leaned in closer, her bright alien eyes fixed on him. Is that what I'm supposed to learn? How to build this connection? Eric scratched the back of his head, trying to figure out how to explain human relationships. Kind of. I mean, it's not something you can just, learn overnight. It takes time, patience, and, well, you can't just force it. You need trust and affection and… So, if I wanted to breed, I would need to wait for affection? Nara interrupted again, still not quite grasping the full concept. But… I have no time to waste, Eric. I need results. My species is in danger. We've already waited too long. Eric sighed. Look, I get it. Your species is on the line here, and you need results. But what I'm trying to tell you is that humans don't just breed with anyone. It's not a medical procedure, it's an emotional experience. He felt like a broken record but tried to keep his patience. And what happens when this connection is formed? Nara asked, clearly more intrigued by the idea now. Well, then you move on to, the physical side of things, Eric said, his voice trailing off awkwardly. He felt his stomach do flips. How had this conversation gotten so strange? Nara thought for a moment, then asked. So, if I were to make a connection with you, you would be willing to proceed with the breeding procedure? Eric nearly choked on his breath. Wait, what? He said, eyes wide. No, I didn't mean. But Nara wasn't listening. She stood up and began moving around the lab, clearly deep in thought. I understand. This connection must be personal, emotional, and physical. Very well. I will proceed with the breeding procedure. Just tell me what to do. Eric was completely speechless. All he could do was watch as Nara confidently began her preparations, still under the mistaken impression that breeding was something akin to a medical procedure. And he was caught in the middle, unsure whether to laugh or just run for the nearest exit. Nara wasn't the type to back down from a challenge, and this assignment was no different. As she began preparing herself for the breeding procedure, her mind was focused on efficiency. She had read the data on human biology, but the whole concept of emotions and physical affection made little sense to her. Her species didn't waste time with feelings, they simply reproduced for survival. She believed that the task ahead was straightforward, and Eric's hesitations only fueled her determination to prove that her method would work. Eric, on the other hand, was now caught in a whirlwind of confusion and awkwardness. He had spent years researching human reproduction and genetics, but no textbook had prepared him for this scenario. Nara's complete lack of understanding about basic human concepts, combined with her clinical approach to the situation, made him more nervous by the second. He tried to focus on the task at hand, but every time Nara casually mentioned breeding, his mind raced with thoughts of how he could possibly explain everything to her without completely embarrassing himself. All right, Eric started, clearing his throat as he tried to regain his composure. So, we need to start with understanding human intimacy. It's not just about physical contact, Nara. It's about building trust. You can't just start with the physical stuff. Nara didn't look at him. She was already fiddling with the strange human devices on the lab table. Trust, she repeated. I see. So, what should I do to build trust? Do I need to, perhaps, observe your biology more closely? Eric blinked, trying to maintain his calm, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. No, that's not it at all, he stammered. It's about getting to know each other, emotionally, before anything physical happens. Nara's eyes narrowed, and she leaned forward, studying him. Emotions. Physical. How does this connection start? Is it a form of physical engagement? Eric wasn't sure if he should laugh, cry, or just walk away. I mean, yes, human reproduction involves physical contact, but it's a lot more than just engaging in some procedure. You've got to form a relationship first. Relationship? Nara repeated, clearly trying to grasp the concept. Do I need to form a relationship with you, then? She raised an eyebrow, her tone far too serious for Eric's liking. Eric was caught off guard. What? No, I mean, you don't have to, no, that's not what I meant. He took a deep breath, hoping to explain without making it worse. What I'm trying to say is that relationships, real human relationships, are built over time. It's not about just one interaction or one test. It's a gradual process. Naro's expression remained unreadable. I understand. So, do I need to learn how to gradually engage in this procedure? Eric's face turned a deeper shade of red. No. I mean, no, it's not a procedure. It's more like. He hesitated, unsure how to articulate the complexity of human emotions in simple terms. Look, human relationships are about feelings. They take time to develop, and they require understanding and, well, mutual respect. Mutual respect, Nara repeated, but her voice was flat, as though she was still processing the words without truly understanding them. So I must respect you before we can proceed with the procedure? Eric rubbed his temples. You're not getting it, he muttered. It's not about a procedure. You can't just treat this like some kind of test. This is about real connections between people. Nara stared at him with an odd look in her eyes. I see. So, you're saying that this breeding procedure requires time? Emotions? She tilted her head, almost as if the concept was a puzzle that she couldn't quite solve. I will attempt to learn this connection. What should I do first? Eric, now desperate to make her understand, let out a heavy sigh. Okay, let's try this. We'll talk. We'll discuss things, get to know each other better. You can't just skip to the end. There's no just breeding without understanding first. Nara nodded thoughtfully. I understand now, she said in a tone that made Eric believe she hadn't grasped the concept at all. I will attempt to build this connection. Then we will proceed with the physical act, yes? Eric winced. Yeah, sure, but let's take this slowly. No rushing. I see, Nara said. Rushing is not advisable. I will be patient. Eric could feel the sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. He wasn't sure whether he should laugh or pull his hair out in frustration. He wasn't sure whether Nara was deliberately misunderstanding everything, or if she was genuinely that clueless. Either way, he was getting more than he had bargained for. I'll start by talking to you about some human customs. About our relationships, he said, trying to salvage the situation. We typically, we go on dates first. You know, spend time together, talk, get comfortable with each other. Nara looked puzzled. Dates? She asked. Like a medical procedure involving food? No! Eric almost shouted. No, nothing medical. A date is when two people, romantically interested people, spend time together to build a connection. They usually go somewhere to eat or enjoy each other's company. So I must eat with you? Nara asked, her voice full of intrigue. To prepare for this connection? Eric rubbed his eyes in disbelief. It's not about food, Nara. It's about enjoying each other's company and getting to know each other better. So we must communicate with our mouths? Nara asked. You speak with your mouth, yes? Eric sighed again, unsure whether he could face another round of questioning. Yes, we talk with our mouths. But more importantly, it's about being open with each other. Sharing feelings. Feelings, Nara said thoughtfully. So I must feel something before this connection can occur? Exactly, Eric replied, relieved that Nara seemed to finally be making progress. You can't just go into a relationship expecting just physicality. You have to feel something deeper. And once we have these feelings, we may proceed with this breeding? Nara asked, her voice now laced with something that almost sounded like curiosity. Eric was about to lose it. No! It's not breeding. This isn't some medical procedure. It's a process. A long process. Nara nodded again, her alien eyes never leaving his. Understood. A long process, she repeated. But we must still proceed with caution. I will wait. I will learn. Eric just stared at her. Sure. Just take your time. Nara smiled, seemingly satisfied with her understanding of the situation. She had no idea that she had just complicated the simplest of human concepts into something far more confusing, and far more awkward, than Eric could have ever anticipated. Nara had already begun preparing for what she assumed was the next logical step in the breeding procedure. She was focused, driven, and, at least in her mind, efficient. Eric, however, was more confused than ever. The lack of emotional understanding, paired with her clinical approach, made him realize how deeply human relationships were intertwined with complexity. They weren't the simple biological processes Nara had assumed, and explaining that was proving to be a bigger challenge than he'd anticipated. All right, Eric said, swallowing hard. Now that we've established that building a connection is important, we need to discuss, well, how humans express affection. He rubbed his face, hoping this conversation would go better than the last. We don't just dive into things physically. There are signs of affection, little things we do to show we care before things get physical. Nara's eyes were locked onto him, seemingly analyzing every word he said. Affection, she repeated, like a scientist carefully considering new data. What are these signs? Eric shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Well, affection can be a lot of things. For example, humans hold hands, cuddle, kiss. These are signs of physical affection. But they also express it through words, through gestures, through spending time together. It's not just about touching someone. So you touch each other as part of this process? Nara asked, her voice cool and matter-of-fact. You hold hands, kiss, but it's not immediate? Eric had to stifle a laugh, but his nerves were getting the better of him. Yeah, that's the idea. It's gradual. You start with something small, like holding hands or hugging, and from there, you move to kissing and, well, it eventually leads to more intimate acts. But you don't rush it. I see, Nara said slowly. So you hold hands before, what did you call it? The procedure? Eric cringed inwardly. It's not a procedure, Nara. I guess you could say it's a process, but it's not mechanical. It's emotional. Emotions again, Nara murmured. So, human breeding requires more than just the act itself. It's an emotional build-up? Exactly, Eric said, feeling a bit more hopeful. It's about connecting emotionally, understanding each other, sharing experiences. You can't just get into a relationship expecting immediate results. Nara tilted her head, clearly still trying to piece it all together. But you say you start by touching. Physical contact. How does this touch feel? Is it painful? Eric's eyes widened at the question. What? No. It's not painful at all. Touching is, well, it's meant to be comforting, reassuring. It's a way of expressing care, affection. Comforting? Nara echoed, leaning slightly closer. You say it feels good? Yes. Eric replied, though now he was starting to feel the heat rising in his cheeks. It feels good, it's supposed to. Human touch is a way of bonding. It's like, when you're close to someone you care about, just holding their hand or being close to them can make you feel safe. Nara looked intrigued, her eyes narrowing as she processed the idea. I see. Touch as comfort. It's not just to initiate the breeding, but to establish trust. Yeah, Eric said, his voice growing steadier. Exactly. It's about trust. About showing that you care before moving on to anything more serious. I understand, Nara said, her tone reflecting a strange kind of certainty. Then we begin with this touch, yes? Eric's stomach lurched. He couldn't believe he was having this conversation. Yeah? If you're comfortable with it. I am comfortable, Nara said without missing a beat. But I still do not fully understand. You say humans hold hands first. Then what happens? You do not breed immediately? She seemed genuinely perplexed, as if she couldn't fathom why something so simple would take so long. No, Eric replied, his voice tight. It's not just about breeding. It's about connecting emotionally, gradually. You can't skip to the end. He felt like he was explaining things in circles, but at least Nara seemed to be trying to understand. Nara studied him carefully for a moment, then asked, And once we've established this trust, then we proceed to kiss? Eric nodded. Yeah, that's typically how it works. Kissing is another way of showing affection, and it's usually an important step in a relationship. And this kissing, it feels good? Nara asked, almost as though she were conducting a study. Eric wasn't sure how to answer without sounding too flustered. Yes, it feels good. It's an intimate gesture. It's a way to connect more deeply with someone, to show that you're close, that you care about them. Nara's expression softened as she processed his answer. I see. And after kissing, you continue with physical affection? Eric wasn't sure how much further he could take this conversation. Well, it's not always just about the physical. Kissing is one part of it, but you also have to build an emotional connection first. It's not just jumping to the end. You have to make sure both people are comfortable with it. And if both people are comfortable? Nara asked, her voice almost clinical in its detachment. Then what happens next? Eric took a deep breath, trying to remain composed. Then, well, it depends. There's no one-size-fits-all approach. It's different for every couple. But it's always about respect and care. Human intimacy isn't just physical. It's about sharing feelings, understanding each other, and communicating. Nara nodded thoughtfully, clearly processing the information. This sounds very complex. Much more than I anticipated. Eric nodded in agreement, relieved that she was starting to grasp the idea. Yeah, it can be. But it's also what makes human relationships meaningful. They're not just about biology. They're about connection, trust, and shared experiences. So, if I were to proceed with this touching and kissing, I would need to ensure that we both feel these emotions? Nara asked, her tone still unsure but eager to learn. Exactly, Eric said, his voice slightly less strained. It's about feeling comfortable with the person you're with, making sure that everything happens naturally and at the right time. Nara gave him a small, thoughtful nod. I believe I understand now. We will take this step by step. Touch, trust, emotions, and then proceed. It is a slow process. Eric breathed a sigh of relief. Yes. Very slow. But, definitely worth it. Nara gave him a curious smile. I look forward to learning more. And with that, she seemed genuinely eager to continue, though Eric couldn't help but feel that he was in for a lot more misunderstandings before this experiment, whatever it turned out to be, was finished. By the time they were nearing the final stages of their study, Eric had no idea whether to be relieved or absolutely terrified. Nara's persistent confusion about human relationships had led to more awkward, embarrassing situations than he could count, and yet, in the most peculiar way, he was starting to feel something. He hadn't expected it, not at all, but as the days went on, the misunderstandings became less frustrating and, in some weird way, kind of endearing. Nara, for her part, had made surprising progress. She was no longer treating breeding as a simple medical procedure. She was actually trying to understand what he meant by emotions, connections, and the complexities of human intimacy. She still didn't fully grasp the idea of emotional bonding, but she was learning. And much to Eric's discomfort, she was starting to ask even more direct questions about human physical interactions. I've been thinking, Nara said, breaking the silence that had fallen between them. We've spent a lot of time discussing trust, touch, and emotions. But when will we get to the actual procedure? Eric's heart nearly stopped. Nara, we're not going to. He stopped, realizing he had to take a step back. He had to clarify the situation. We're not going to skip straight to anything. It's not how it works. I know, she replied, looking at him with that same serious, clinical gaze. But I feel I understand enough now to proceed. We've built a connection. I understand that now. Eric blinked rapidly, caught off guard by her words. Well, okay, but I still don't think you quite get it. He rubbed his temples, feeling like he was on the verge of mental exhaustion. This isn't some task we're checking off. This is something more. It's not like just jumping into bed and doing whatever you think needs to be done. Naro's brow furrowed. I'm not rushing, Eric. I understand the importance of trust. But I have spent time observing how humans interact with each other. I've read your biology texts, seen the interactions, and I think I understand now that you need to feel before you proceed with breeding. She said the word as if it were a scientific term, one devoid of any real meaning. Eric's stomach twisted. He had no idea how to explain that everything she was saying was just completely off. Nara, it's not about proceeding at all, he said, his voice growing a little more desperate. It's about creating a real connection, something meaningful, not just some prearranged ritual. But is not this connection the foundation of the procedure? Nara pressed, her tone unwavering. We have spent time together, shared information, and now we are ready for the next phase, yes? Eric was trying his best to remain calm, but the whole thing was making his head spin. Nara, listen to me. Human relationships are about respect and shared feelings, not just checking off steps like you're completing a checklist. We don't just move forward because we've spent some time together. We do it because both people genuinely feel that emotional bond. He wasn't sure how much clearer he could make it. And what happens if we feel this bond? Nara asked, her curiosity still very much in control. Once the bond is felt, does the process move to physical affection? Yes, Eric said slowly, unsure how much further this conversation could go. But it's not about the process. It's about sharing something, experiencing something deeper with someone. It's not about just touching or kissing because that's what's next. Nara's expression softened slightly, as if she were finally grasping something. So, the emotional connection must be genuine before any physical closeness is allowed? Exactly, Eric said, his voice a little more steady now. It's about both people wanting to take the next step, when the time is right. And when that happens, there's a mutual understanding of what each person needs and feels. Nara seemed to consider this for a long moment, her eyes thoughtful. I see now. It is not a simple progression. It's a choice. The bond must come first before the physical act. Eric nodded, relieved that it seemed like Nara was starting to understand the complexity of human relationships. Yes. It's about choice, understanding, and the emotional aspect. You can't force it. It has to be something that naturally grows between two people. I understand, Nara said quietly, her voice almost soft. And so, the physical part, it comes only after this mutual understanding is reached. Right, Eric said, his breath escaping him in a shaky sigh. It's about finding someone who not only shares your feelings, but also respects you enough to wait for that connection to form. And once the connection is formed, you are ready for the next phase? Nara asked, her voice carefully controlled, though her curiosity was evident. Eric felt himself growing increasingly uncomfortable. He had no idea how to answer that without overcomplicating everything even further. Yeah, but there's no next phase you just jump into. It's not about just physicality, Nara. It's about making sure you've both established something real. Something that's more than just touching. I see, Nara said again, almost to herself. It's about more than just touching. It's about feeling something deeper. Exactly, Eric said, his voice finally steady. You get it now. It's not just about mating or whatever you think we're doing. It's about real connection, human connection. For a long moment, there was only silence between them. Eric wasn't sure whether he had succeeded in explaining things, or if he just made everything more confusing for Nara. But then, after what felt like an eternity, Nara spoke again, her voice oddly soft, almost vulnerable. I think I understand now, she said, the words slow and deliberate. This is not just a procedure. It's about choice. About sharing something meaningful. And that is what makes it different. Eric stared at her for a long time, unsure how to respond. Yeah, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. That's right. There was a strange, uncomfortable pause between them before Nara's expression softened even more, and she took a small step toward him. Eric, I believe I've learned a lot from you, she said quietly, her gaze meeting his. And though I do not fully understand human emotions, I now see that connection, trust, and respect must come first. Eric blinked, his mind racing. He had no idea what was coming next, but whatever it was, he couldn't deny the tension between them. I'm glad you understand, he said, trying to keep his composure. Nara looked at him carefully, her eyes almost contemplative. Perhaps, she said, her voice almost teasing. The next step is not as straightforward as I thought. Eric's stomach did a flip, and for a moment, he wasn't sure if he was about to have a panic attack or if something entirely different was about to unfold. But whatever happened next, he knew this. His life was never going to be the same again.